Good day, sir. Good day, everyone. We are the reporters of Lesson 3 Strategies to Mitigate Nature-Induced Crises. I am Irish Certifico, and my co-reporter is Hermie as Flores. This subject is Crim 6. Strategies to mitigate to induce crises. The DRRM policies and strategies. These are the comprehensive rules from national government office cascaded down to the local government units. It is composed of different line agencies where each of these line agencies are given their specific response and responsibilities to avert mitigate crises and disaster. Implementing rules and regulation of Republic Act Number 10121, also known as an Act of Strengthening the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management System, providing for the National Disaster Risk, institutionalizing the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Plan, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes. And we have here rule number 1, we have general provision. General provisions. Section 1. These rules shall be known and cited as the implementing rules and regulation of Republic Act Number 10-121, also known as the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction Management Act of 2010, PDRRM Act of 2010. Section 2. Purpose. These rules and hereby promulgated to prescribe the manner and procedure and guidelines for the implementation of the PDRRM Act of 2010 to facilitate the compliance therewith and achieve the objectives therefore. Okay, so now let's proceed to rule number 2, section 1. We have here adaptation, capacity, contingency planning, disaster mitigation, disaster preparedness, disaster prevention, disaster response, disaster risk, and disaster risk reduction. Section 1. Whenever used in these rules, the following shall refer to: first, adaptation, the adjustment in the natural or human system in response to actual expected climatic stimuli or their effects, which moderates harm or exploits beneficial opportunities. Next, we have capacity, a combination of all strengths and resources available within the community, society, or organization that can reduce the level of risk or effect of a disaster. Next, we have contingency planning, a management process that analyzes specific potential events or emerging situations that might threaten society or environment and establishes arrangement in the advance to enable timely, effective, and appropriate response to such events and situations. We have also here disaster. Disaster is a serious disruption of the functioning of a community or a society involving the widespread human, material, economic, or environmental losses and impacts which exceeds the ability of its own resources. Disaster mitigation, the lessening or limitation of the adverse impact of hazard and related disaster. Mitigation measures include but not limited to the engineering techniques and hazard instant. We have also here disaster preparedness, the knowledge and capacities developments by governments, professionals, response and recovery organizations, communities, and individuals to effectively anticipate, respond, and to recover from the impacts of likely imminent or currently hazard events or conditions. Disaster prevention, the outright avoidance of adverse impacts of hazard and related disaster. It expresses the concept and the intention to completely avoid potential adverse impacts through action. Next, we have disaster response. The provision of emergency service and public assistance during or immediately after a disaster in order to save lives, reduce health impacts, ensure public safety, and meet the basic subsistence needs of the people affected. Disaster risk. The potential disaster losses in the lives, health, status, livelihoods, assets, and services which could occur to a particular community or society over some specified future time period. Next, we have disaster risk reduction, the concept and the practice of reducing disaster risk through the systematic effort to analyze and manage the causal factors of disasters, including through reduced exposure to hazard, lessens vulnerability of people and property-wise management for the land and the environment, and improve the preparedness for adverse events.
I am Hermie Flores. I am the next reporter of Lesson 3. So rule number 2, Section 1. Early warning system, emergency management, exposure, geographic information system, hazard, disaster risk reduction management, disaster risk reduction management and information system, disaster victim, early recovery. So first is early warning system. The set of capacities needed to generate and disseminate timely and meaningful warning information to enable individuals, communities, and organizations threatened by a hazard to prepare and to set appropriately and in sufficient time to reduce the possibility of harm or loss. And next is emergency. Unforeseen or sudden occurrence, especially danger, demanding immediately action. And next is emergency management. The organization and management of resources such as volunteers, funds, donations, food and non-food items. Temporary or evacuation centers and responsibilities for addressing all aspects of emergencies, in particular preparedness, response, and initial recovery steps. Next is exposure, the degree to which the elements at risk are likely to experience hazard events of different magnitudes. And next is geographic information system, a database which contains, among others, geohazard assessments, information on climate change and climate risk reduction and management. And next, hazard, a dangerous phenomenon, substance, human activity or condition that may cause loss of life, injury or other health impacts, property damage, loss of livelihood and services, social and economic disruption, or environmental damage. And next is disaster risk reduction and management, the systematic process of using administrative directives, organizations and operational skills and capacities to implement strategies, policies and improve capacities in order to lessen of the adverse impacts of hazards and the possibility of disaster. And next is disaster risk reduction and management information system, a specialized database which contains, among others, information on disasters and their human material, economic and environmental impacts, risk assessment and mapping and vulnerable groups. Next is disaster victims, persons or group of persons who have been adversely affected by a natural or human induced hazards, who have to leave their habitual places of residence due to existing or impending threats. Damaged shelter units with casualty among immediate family members, or those who remain in their habitual place or origin when still habitable but whose main source of income or livelihood had been damaged and are experiencing hopelessness and difficulty in coping or responding to the onslaught of the hazardous events on their own resources. Next is early recovery. Multi-dimensional process of recovery that begins in a humanitarian setting. It is guided by development principles that seek to build on humanitarian programs and catalyze sustainable development opportunities. And we have here rule number 2, section 1, land use planning, mitigation, risk management, risk transfer, state of calamity, sustainable development, public sector employees, rehabilitation, resilience, risk assessments.
Land use planning, the process undertaken by public authorities to identify, evaluate, and decide on the different options for the use of the economic and social and environmental objectives in the implication for different communities and interest groups, and the subsequent formulation and proclamation of plans that describe the permitted or acceptable uses. Mitigation, structural and non-structural measure undertaken to limit the adverse impact of natural hazard, environmental degradation, and technological hazard, and to ensure the ability of at-risk communities to address vulnerabilities, aims at minimizing the impact of disasters. Risk management, the systematic approach and practice of managing uncertainty to minimize the potential harm and loss. Next, we have risk transfer, the process of formally or informally shifting and financial consequence of particular risk from one party to another, whereby household, community, and enterprise or state authorities shall be obtained from the resources. We also have here state of calamity, a condition involving mass casualty and major damages to the property, disruption of means and livelihoods, roads, and normal way of life of people in the affected areas as a result of the occurrence of natural or human-induced hazard. Next, we have sustainable development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability to future generation to meet their own needs. Public sector employees, all persons in the civil service. Rehabilitation, measures that ensure the ability of affected communities areas to restore their normal level of functioning by rebuilding their normal livelihood and damages infrastructures and increasing the community's organizational capacity. We have also here resilience, the ability of a system, community, or society exposed to hazard to resist, absorb, and accommodate, recover to the effects of a hazard in a timely, efficient manner, including through the preservation and restoration of its essential basic structure and function. Next is response. Any concerted effort by two or more agencies, public or private, to provide assistance or intervention during or immediately after a disaster to meet the life preservation and basic substance needs of those people affected in the restoration of essential public activities and facilities. Second to the last is risk, the combination of the probability of an event and its negative consequence, also the probability of harmful consequence or expected losses, deaths, injuries, properties, livelihood, economic activities, disruption, or environmental damage, resulting from the interaction between the natural or human-induced hazard and vulnerable condition. last one is risk assessment, a methodology to determine the nature and extent of risk by analyzing potential hazard and evaluating existing condition of vulnerability that together could potentially harm exposed people, property, services, livelihood, and the environment on which they depend. That's all our report, and this is for lesson 3. We are the reporter of lesson 3. I am Irish Certifico, and my co-reporter is Mr. Hermie Flores. Thank you, sir, and God bless.